After a number of manhunts, someone tries to collect reward money. And Saul is told that David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul takes 3 crack battalions and he sets out to look for David. By now, with 600 outlaws. Who here's ever been on the run from somebody? It doesn't have to be the law. Just show of hands. Anybody been on the run from somebody? Have you? Okay, we will assume it's not the law. Yeah, been on the run. Sure, it's an awful feeling. Ducking people. Maybe you owe somebody money and you duck them. Yeah. So, Saul descends upon David's location. But nature calls, and Saul unwittingly enters a cave to relieve himself that turns out to be the very cave where David and his men are hiding far back inside. And his men go crazy. They can't believe what they're seeing. Well, we'll go back to this one. They can't believe what they're seeing. The king, who's got a bounty on all their heads, comes to them without any bodyguards in the most vulnerable position you can be in. It's a slam dunk. And who else could have put the king in that exact position at that particular location? The men say, because they see David's hesitating, hey, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands to deal with as you wish. Only the Lord never said that. At least the Bible never mentions it. But I suppose the men can't be blamed too harshly for taking some liberties here. After all, they're living every day as if it were their last. It could be their last. Going up against Saul and his 3,000 elite troops, 5-to-1 ratio, wouldn't end well for them. So David's desperate 600 men lean on him. They quote the Bible, at least it sounds like the Bible. They leave unsaid that David's gambling with all their lives by not killing this king. And they point to a coincidence that seems to have God's fingerprints all over it. So, David inches toward the vulnerable king, the unsuspecting king. But as he crawls away from his 600 anxious friends, all crowded into one space, talk about peer pressure, he has a few moments to think. And what he thinks about is his story. I assassinated a king. Great story. I stabbed him in the back. Great story. I killed him while his pants were down. You know, that's not a story at all. Anybody in that situation would have done that, especially with 600 of his buddies urging him on. You know, the desire for the approval of the group is one of the strongest urges known to humankind. Jesus talked about what anyone would naturally do when he said to the Christians, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore. If anyone forces you to go with 1 mile, go with him for 2. In the words of my grandson on his blog, instead of doing what anybody else would do today, be legendary. Be legendary. So, David changes his mind, and he decides to have a story to tell. You see, believers see more than other people. David knows the events of that day will eventually become a story that will be told and retold, possibly for generations. The events of that day will be part of his legacy. We've had funerals here, and we've had people come up and say things, say powerful things, tell stories that are impactful, We've also had funerals where people haven't known what to say. And so they've told ordinary things. Things not even worth mentioning. So he decides that killing the king while he was relieving himself was not the story he wanted to tell his grandkids one day. Granddaddy, please tell us one more time how you sneaked up behind the king and ran him through while he was using the potty. Great story. So David doesn't kill Saul, although he does do something we wouldn't think much of. And neither will his men. He cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. Big deal. Yet even at that, afterward, David's conscience-stricken for having done it. The royal robe symbolized the authority of the king that God had put in place. And cutting a piece of it away is saying, since you haven't done something about him, God, I will. He says to his men, guys, I feel guilty. He's still the king. And unless something's changed, it's still against the law to kill the king. You know what they say? Are you kidding us? Are you out of your mind? They reply. Then we'll kill him. But David doesn't allow that. Verse 7 doesn't allow that, and he goes away. Now, we're almost done. 21st century America would just shake its head at this entire crazy lesson. Our culture has redefined Jesus as a good and moral teacher, nothing more, who points us to God. He's a sort of God-light. So, it sees Christianity as nothing more than believing in God, respecting Jesus, and living by the golden rule. Reverently obeying God's word, as David had just done, is viewed as vestiges of an older, irrelevant, outmoded belief system. It's not wrong so much as it is unnecessary, since there are other more tolerant avenues to God. I'm going to enumerate a few things. We had a brother in the church recently. He and his wife just came home from counseling. The next day, he puts a chair in the middle of his room. He has her sit in it, and he washes her feet. We have a sister, a widow in this church, who, when her husband died, took her insurance policy and gave the church 10%. Money she had to live on. And every day, every week since then, she has tied her money. You know what the world would say about the guy who put the chair there for his wife and washed her feet? You know what the world would say about the widow who did that? Crazy. That's extreme. It's not necessary. You know what they say to David for not getting rid of Saul? You're crazy. That's ridiculous. It's not necessary. I remember when we will go there. Next time. The story we will tell. What's the Lord saying to us? First of all, there's David's story. First of all, we are all writing stories that people need to hear. People around us are impacted by the things we do for God. Our children, our grandchildren, our friends in church, the people out there. We are all writing stories that people need to hear. And those stories will be told forever. They will reverberate forever in heaven. If this morning you find that you are holding that knife and you have a chance to do something that is opposed to the will of God, and you've got people pushing you to make that step, what we want to encourage you to do is to remember the story you will tell. Please stand. Aye.